Today's daf is daf lamed ches. Quickly reiterate or recap what we just did, the last sugi we just did. The whole sugi that we're learning about right now is that about an animal that's a mesokenes. That means it'll die any moment. Because when it's alive, you're permitted to shecht it. And we have to make sure that the animal's alive to the very end. So therefore we said that according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, we need the animal to move its foot and the foreleg and the hind leg to move it forward or something. So by doing that, we know that the animal was alive till the very end. We'll soon see exactly when that has to be. And Rabbi Lezer says you don't have to go that extent. Zinka is enough. That means if the blood spurts out during the shchita, that means it was alive. There was vitality there. Didn't just ooze out. And what do you call it? And Shimon agreed with him, and he said, Nachman, if you shechted at night and you found in the morning there was blood all over the thing, that means it was zinka, and that's good enough. And the Chachamim say, they hold like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel that we need actually movement of the leg, but you don't need both legs, the hind leg and the foreleg. Either one is good enough. And we said that there's a difference between a small animal and a large animal. By a small animal, if it just stretches out its hand, it doesn't prove anything. Why? Because that's part of the throes of death. Doesn't show there's any life. And Rabbi Onan understood from Shmuel, not that the animal has to extend its hand, its foreleg out, and then bring it back in. No, you don't need two steps. If the leg was out and brought it back in, just that one step, that's enough. Because an animal, when it dies, it doesn't bring it back in. It spreads out, it jerks, extends outwards. So therefore, it must be that it's that's good enough. It means it was alive. That's a chiddush of Shmuel. And then we said these tests are only there if it's a mesokenes. Not a mesokenes, you don't need to do any tests, and I don't care if it doesn't move at all, it's kosher. You don't have to do any tests. And then the whole Gemara we learned yesterday was, how do you know mesokenes b'chal is kosher? And we finally brought different rayas for mesokenes kosher. Two, we brought even Yecheskel's thing that fascinating thing, one of the things he said was that he says to Rebbe, why are you making me do all these terrible things when I'm such a frumaid? I'm doing things that no one else has to do. And one of them is that I would not eat a mesokenes. Any animal that just say, cut, I mean, because it's about to die, I will never eat it. But then he said something fascinating. Any food that there's a shayla on and you need a shulchan aruch to paskin that is kosher or a rav, I wouldn't touch. I told him I said
about since a trailer went out about it, so he wouldn't touch it. Another one of them.
I don't remember if I'm sure it wasn't this. Maybe it was in Gemara when it says over there that all the why in the end of Megillah we have all the Amoraim saying why I lived so long and what chutzim I have, and they mention different things. Maybe it says that, I don't remember. Okay, so then we had the last thing we learned is Machlekes Rav Shmuel. According to Rav, he said you need an animal. What are the signs of life for us? So Kenneth, he says if the animal is goya, if the animal makes sounds, moo sounds, or it defecates, but it throws it doesn't just fall out. It sort of flies a little bit. It moves out. So it shows its vitality. Or it can wiggle its ear. It can wiggle its ear. So we're just summarizing what we did so far with the Flameches, and Shmuel says you don't need to wiggle the ear. Okay, so we're up to the Gemara here, Meisave, about 10 lines on the top of the page. We're going to ask now a question on Rav. So Rav said you need either goya, making sounds, or itilareya, defecating, or kishkasha aznai, or the ear has to wiggle. And Shmuel argues about you don't need to go to that extent. We're in Daf Lamed Ches, 38a. I don't know if it's A or not, but
who's supposed to be watching for this? The shaykhit, or you have to have someone else there too?
In those days, there was no such thing as a separate boidik. In fact, those days, every shaykhit is called a tabach. A tabach is the butcher. The butcher, the shaykhit is all one the same.
You're focusing on getting the shechita right, and you're busy looking around to see if it's moving its ear.
So you're right. But sometimes he's a mumch and everything else. It was only the Vad Arba Rotzes that came along and made a special takana that the shaykhit and the butcher should not be the same person. Because you're a vested interest, make sure everything's kosher. Make I'll ask you a question. Says the Braisa. Rabbi Yosi says, we used to say, Goya, if it makes sound during shchita, Ein ze pirchus. Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Yosi named Rabbi Meir, that is not a sign of pirchus, which would be a problem with Rav. Rav said that a sign of pirchus is goya. Here it says not. Rabbi Lezer, but Rabbi Yosi Omer, Mishmoi, afilu hitilu reya. Another question on Rav. Even if it defecated, it's not a sign of pirchus. It's not enough sign of vitality. Or the kishcha bezinva. Now that's a problem because our Mishnah clearly said if you wag its tail, that's a good sign. So that's not a problem. Our Mishnah can, that's our Mishnah. But the other two is a problem. Ain't the pichas kasha goya goya kasha de kasha on Rav said that those are good signs. It says clearly the Bryce are not. So Gemara obviously going to say there's two different kinds of goya. Goya goya lekasha. The sounds that the animal makes, there's no question. You know why? Oh, the ovi color. If it's a thick voice, then that means it's a good sign that it's alive. And how the ami color. If it's a soft voice, then maybe it's just part of the throes of dying. It makes a sound. Exactly. It doesn't prove that it's alive. Or reya rei nami lekasha. Kan bishoy says here it just oozes out, and kan bimatreses. And here it expels it out, it ejects it out. So if it with this force, that means it's alive. And if it just runs, and that's what I was talking about. And B'Shesasas is the Bryce that just oozes out. Amar Rav Chizda said, now we're going to have an interesting argument. The Mishnah says you need these signs during the Shechita. Which stage of the Shechita do you need to see these signs? You say, if I see the animal doing this, is it right that it's alive? And that's good enough. Amar Chizda. Pirchas sha'amru, I heard that when it says pirchas, it's b'sayv shchita. Now I heard, what does sayv shchita mean? So does sayv shchita mean you finish the shchita and then look now what's happening? Is that when you say shchita? Or it means sometime during the shchita, but closer to the end? Says Rav Chizda, what I understand is, what does b'sayv shchita mean? What does it mean? It means be'em to shchita. After the shchita is over, we don't care, it's dead already. I don't care if it doesn't move or doesn't move. It's during the shechita we need to see the animal alive, and we see before the end of the shechita that the animal makes these, extends his foreleg and all that. Is that the animal's alive? So by the time you finish the shechita, you killed a living animal. It wasn't dead already, because dead already, then it's an avela. We're talking about a musakenis. The animal is going to die any minute, like a goisus by a person. But if you saw the animal making all of these movements. And what do you call it? The beginning of the shchita proves nothing. Could be died in the middle of the shchita, and therefore by the time you got to the gemar shchita, it was already a dead animal. So Rav Chizda said, how do I know that? Now we learned in our Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah we learned yesterday. A small animal like a lamb or a goat, shiposh to yod, if it extended its foreleg. It didn't bring it back, psul, it's possible. Why? It's not a sign of life. Why is that a sign of life? Because when an animal dies, it moves around, it wiggles about, and therefore the foreleg moved out. Doesn't prove it was alive then. Now, Amos, what stage are we talking about? We're talking about if we're talking about that what? After the shchita was over or the very end, the animal went only one way. You tell me, oh, it's not kosher. What do you mean? You want the animal to continue living after you killed it? What does that mean? After the animal, why should it? After you shechted it, it's not enough that the animal moved its foreleg forward without coming back. What do you want from the animal? We're talking about Bem Shchita. We're talking about before you finish the Shchita. And he says that if it moved one way, then it means it's dead already. It moved the foreleg, extended outward, but that's part of dying. That's a death nerves. And that's what he's saying. You needed to bring it in, which is not a sign of death, but rather a sign of life. So this is only empty Shchita, because the Shchita is over already. What's shot, the leg, and doesn't come back instead. Rava says, and we'll see later Rava actually holds, he says, no, it means after you finish the shchita, you need the leg moving about. You can ask me a question, what, you want the animal to continue living after it's dead? Johnny, I might say, if it doesn't bring the leg back in, after shchita, yes. Even after the shchita, it's still, if it was a living animal, a healthy animal, after the shchita, generally speaking, there's still a little bit of life, a second or something. So therefore, if the animal didn't bring its foreleg back after the shchita, that means it was dead already before. That's what he says here. So Rava holds it means after that. Soif shchita is when you do this test. Rab Nachman says, he's a third opinion. He says, even in the beginning of the shchita, if it shows signs of vitality, it's a living. Then what you shechted was a living animal. Says the Gemara, how do I know that? It brings a very strong raya. It's not in the very same Mishnah that you just brought. Rab Shimon said, "Hashaychet b'layla, shechted at night," and you don't know what happened, which clearly means that it's totally dark. How can you
It's
shech?
bizarre. You can't see what you're doing.
If you can't see blood, unless if it's, let's say, semi-dark, can you? How can you not see blood?
The simonim, before.
He feels with his hand, but he couldn't see anything. Hashoichet balayli yeshechted at night. Ulamach and the following day matzak solim malay dam. No, but you couldn't test at night to see, but you in the morning.
Blood sprayed all over the wall.
Yeah, talk about a masakenis here, right? So you couldn't see if the animal moved his leg or not because it's pitch black. So you're going to use a simon of zinka. And according to the opinion, it says zinc is good enough. And you couldn't see at night in the blood, but in the morning you woke up and you saw a malaya dam. You saw it. Now, if you take the Mishnah literally, ksolim means the walls around the animal. Blood spurted out everywhere. Sheda, Zinka. Ukemidas Rabbi Lezer, and this follows you, Rabbi Lezer, that Zinka is good enough. And Shmuel says, we don't mean the walls of the house, we mean the walls of the neck. That's a very obvious question. If you're going to tell me that if the animal was alive, for example, the blood was spurting out already, is not a sign of life. You need the emter shchita or saiv shchita. No, so what's that? You see blood in the morning. How do you know when that happened? How do you know what happened? If it happened to shchita, is
about milliseconds.
Yeah, exactly. But had you been there or somebody would have been there, you probably can tell. You probably tell. Remember also we learned that you can be shechting a whole day one way, just one shchita. Yeah, up a whole day. Remember?
As long as you don't pause.
Exactly. So maybe they weren't. It's not like that you have under pressure. You have to do so many behaviors per hour or 900 birds an hour, whatever it is. In those days, you did one behavior. How much can you afford? Took your time. Yeah, maybe that happens. A good enough sign is all good because you don't know when it happened. Who cares when it happened? If you tell me it only works when it's shchita, so how do you know? Just because you see blood around the neck, how do you know when it happened? Maybe it happened in the beginning of shchita. So therefore, is a raya to me. I don't care what stage of the shchita it is. If you have the sign of life, it was a living animal that you shechted. That's what the Nachman Yitzchak says. Says the Gemara. How do you know that? The Dilma. Maybe like this. Maybe this particular sign is the strongest sign of life. Maybe you need more life, more chayis to the animal to spritz its blood out, to sprinkle it all out, more than moving its leg. So maybe, okay, zinuk, it's enough tchila shchita. But the other signs of life, which is the leg, the foreleg, the hind leg, moving out and bringing it back in, or just bringing it back in, maybe those signs have to be dark because it requires less effort. Maybe that's only a sign of life if it's in the middle of the shchita. So the dilma shiny zinuk the adif. Maybe zinuk is more of a sign of life. So there, even the beginning of shchita, if the animal is able to the blood to spray everywhere, is a raya that was full of vitality, and we'll assume it was alive till the very end. But the rest, maybe you need it to be in the middle of the shchita. No, so right now the Gemara is understanding that zinuk is the best sign. Is the best. It's better than the pshitas yad. Better for sign for life. Pirchus. Better than the pirchus v'yad. Better than the pirchus v'regel. Better than everything. Says the Gemara. How can it be? Me adif. You think zinuk is a chumrah? Zinuk is fakert is lesser sign of life, and the chiddush is in the Mishnah that even that, according to that opinion, is good enough. But now, Rabbi Yossi holds Rabbi Shimon, because I'll prove it to you. Rabbi Lezer Daya. You, Rabbi Shimon, said that you have to move out the foreleg and the hind leg. Comes along and says, Daya, it's enough. Im zinka. What does that sound, Daya? That's yeah. Tal forget this is a lesser side of a life, and you're saying that's good enough. How can you tell me that kill shchita shows a life, but the other ones you need shchita doesn't make sense? So I think about okay, maybe Talmud Ramgamul. Remember, Ramgamul needs both legs, foreleg and hind leg. Okay, so this is a step less. Rabbanan say one leg is good enough. That's mamish very little vitality. So maybe what you're saying here is you say that one leg is enough chayis. I hold that you need more than that. I hold less than Gamliel. He said you need both foreleg and hind leg. That much you don't need, and therefore maybe Gamliel also would hold that tchila shchit is good enough for that, and he says no, zinik is good enough, and that's tchila shchit is good enough. But the Rabbanon shita, that either the foreleg or the hind leg, which is the least sign of life, that has to be memta shchita. So how you know that everything is good enough tchila shchita? Amar Avina said. Ravina said, Amali, Sama the son of Chulkoi, said to me, yeah, look at this name here. Akshiba, this is fascinating. You have this 3 times in Gemara. Akshiba Avu, the father of Bar Abuchras, the father of the son of Abuchras, which is who? Abuchras. But we call him the father of the son of Abuchras because everyone knew, or Abuchram. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's a mem. Everyone knows Abuchram. No one knows his father. So we call him like the father of Shmuel, Avu de Shmuel. His name was Abba, but we all call him Avu de Shmuel. This person, he was the father of the son of Abuchram. Anyway, everyone knows the son of Abuchram. But interesting, he was known as the name of the son of Abuchram, yet no one knew that realized who his father was. The others say, Achmed Abuchram, the brother of the son of Abuchram. That what? If you want to say that zinuk is more of a sign of life than one leg. But then we learned in the Mishnah, Chacham say, but it's not good enough zinuk until at least movement of one of the legs, which shows that zinuk is the least sign of vitality. So therefore, the question of Nachum Yitzchak is, you say that we know that it's good enough, that what do you call it? So this is a raya to the Nachum Yitzchak that zinuk is good enough, and that's the weakest sign of life. So surely moving your leg, foreleg, hind leg, whatever it is, surely is a sign of life, and tchil is good enough. Okay, so the Gemara. The Rabbanan, who are they arguing with? Who are the Rabbanan arguing with? If you say what? They're arguing of Ram Gamliel. What do they say? They're saying, this is part of the Rayat, who are saying that zinuk is the weakest sign of life. The Rabbanan say, you need at least a minimum. They're arguing that Gamliel says you need both legs. If Chacham are coming to be lenient, they don't say they should say kivon as soon as. Kivon shepichu, kivon shepichu is a midboyle. Should have just said, look, as soon as you move one leg, it's good enough, I don't need both. What's the lashon ad? We're going to be machmeh, more than you. It's clear. Pita ad Rabbi Lezer. The if this is a chumrah where they're saying, what do you mean? If zinuk is stronger than them, what do you mean ad? It's just said kiva is a raya that zinuk is the weakest sign of life, and yet it's good enough tchil shchita, because otherwise, how can you know in the morning when it happened? Is a raya that any kind of pirch is good enough to get shchita. Okay, so you have Rav Nachman Yitzchak says beginning of shchita, you have Rav Chizda says the middle of shchita, and then you had Rav as a question. So Rav and I will spell it out. Rav Amar pirch she'amru b'sayv shchita. He holds after the animal yeshachtin, we look at these signs, and Taisa says, so how's he going to deal with the question of if zinuk? The Mishnah says clearly that in the morning you woke up and you find that this and that, the blood. So we say that is kosher. But l'chayda, what's that? Maybe it happened to tchil shchita, and according to you, it's not good enough. So he says here. So Taisa says because it's very uncommon for the blood to spread out until you actually finish the whole shchita. It's only when you give a cut, when it's finally wide open, that the blood comes spurting out. Before then, it just oozes out. So therefore, the Rabbi says he's now concerned about this issue you brought up. Anyway, how do I know? But it says in the pasuk, it says we had this a few times already. It says shoyd, oy chesev, oy eiz, right, all the different animals. And it says ki yevolet when they give birth, and then you wait 7 days with its mother before you go ahead and shecht. So we dash in every word in that pasuk. We dash in, it says, shoyd, okay. Oy kesev, what do you mean? Or a sheep, prat l'kalayim. If it's a hybrid, or if it's a mixture of let's say the mother was a goat and the father was a cow, whatever, or a lamb, it's you don't bring it as a carbon. Oy eiz, or a goat, prat l'nidma. It's born proper parents, but it doesn't look like that family. It looks like another family altogether. And we'll have in Sechtanida all these cases of human beings, of nidma, and if you're moiled like a nochash, all these different things. Prat nidma, ki yevoled. We're talking about a carbon. When can you bring a carbon? Ki yevoled, when it gives birth. Prat liyajadayf. Cesarean, you don't bring it as a carbon. Shivas yami, you wait 7 days of the mother. Prat lemechusas man. We don't want you to bring a carbon that's less than 7 days. Even though the mother's still alive, we don't want. Tachas imoy, what they have to add the word tachas imoy, prat liyosim. If the animal was born and the mother was already dead, that's called a yosim. If the animal was born, no, the mother had to live for at least 5 minutes, at least 1 minute after the baby calf, let's say, was born, before you can bring it as a carbon. Prat liyosim. Now the mother's going to try to understand the baby. He gave birth, and yet it's a yosim. What's going on here?
If the mother died a natural death, and the baby
I will talk about it right now. We'll talk about this. Wait a second. How Yosem Mechel? We're talking about a Yosem here. We're talking about Elema, the Yelidate Ime, that the mother gave birth. Vahada Mace, and then the mother died. What's you need a chiddush? You need a pasuk. Tell me that it's all right. La'olam teichi v'tezel, or the entire life of the baby of the offspring, you can only bring it if the mother's still alive. That's no such thing. Ella the Mesa, Vahada Yelidate. Must be that the mother died first, and it was born right after the mother died. Once the mother's dead, he can't give birth. It had to be cesarean. So we already know that's excluded. We already know that it can't be possible. It must be that it happens simultaneously. In case I already had a whole discussion, remember we have a concept of whether things can happen simultaneously, if efshul tzamtzem or tzamtzem. And here's b'dei shemaim. Can you be mitzamtzem b'dei shemaim? Ela pshita, zeh pirish l'misha v'zeh pirish l'chaim. As the baby was being born, the mother died. They gave natural birth.
It's possible that it can happen in Rosh Hashanah. How could we identify it?
That it
happened exactly.
Okay. That's what Taylor's talking about. Can you say Efshel and something that we can see that the Abisha makes exact?
The mother now on her heart rate monitor and the black line just as good as that.
I see that.
Okay. So Zeb Pirish Lamid L'chaim must be at that moment. This is what happened. The mother died and the baby was born. Now, if you hold that the mother has to be alive, the animal has to be alive until, like we just said by Shchita, has to be alive till the very end, and that's why we need these simonim afterwards. Therefore, you need a pasuk to tell you that even though the mother was alive and everything else, so you would think that's good enough. Like we see by Musa Kenes, if the animal is still very good enough, comes to tell you that this nevertheless it's a yasam, you can't bring it as a carbon. Because it's possible to have a natural birth, because the mother was mamish alive till the very end, and still it's no good. You can tell me you don't need the mother alive till the very end. You said that or even if it was alive, you have these signs good enough. I don't care if the animal was alive, then the next stage is la malay. I mean, when the Torah says over here that there was a yasam, the mother died somewhere in the middle, and we don't really care anymore because already half the shchita was done properly. No, the baby couldn't have been born. It had to be cesarean. Is that we need the animal to be alive until the very end to say that the animal's alive. And that's why we need a pasuk that even though it wasn't born through cesarean, you shouldn't bring it if it was born a yasim. Okay, says the Rav so the halacha, final halacha is the following brayse. It says in the brayse, when it comes to a small animal, shaposh the yod will stretch out its and psula. That's no sign of life. That's normal throes of death. The foreleg. Avol beregel. When it comes to the hind leg, bein pashta v'loy kafva, whether just extended it, or bein kafva v'loy pashta, just brought it back in, jada is kosher. Why? Because it's not part of the throes of death. Anything which does not happen naturally when the animal, the nerves, then we say it's a sign of life. When do we say this by a daka? When it comes to a large animal, the animal generally doesn't have these kind of nerves that it goes stretching his legs out and so on. Bein biyad, bein beregel, bein posture like kaffa, bein kaffa like posture like it's all kosher because these are all signs of life. Because a big animal, when it dies, it doesn't have his legs, flailing about. Then the Braisa continues. The oif, but a bird, afilu le'rafrif. We said before you have to wag its tail. Wagging its tail requires energy, even if it just moves a little bit. From the word like raf, very lazy. Only with a little bit. Elagape. Only its wings. Velay kishka didn't, wiggle it back and forth strongly. Elazanvai. And its tail only did a little bit. Hareze pirchus. That's enough of a sign. Everything you just said in the Bright says not Mishnah. At least not mafuded by inference. It says in Mishnah. Why? Nefesh. It says clearly yoda, the foreleg. So only by a foreleg we say stretching out is not a sign of life. But when it comes to the hind leg, we can infer from our Mishnah that I don't care which, any direction is good enough. Said you're right. Daka ingasaloi. So it says in Mishnah also the difference in the dak. Only by daka these signs apply. By gas, even one sign is good enough, or even doesn't move at all is good enough. But the answer is if the bird. That's the chiddush. Even such a small movement. Says the Mishnah. Interesting how he's changed the whole subject. Hashoichet, fascinating Mishnah. Hashoichet lo'evig chavim. Somebody shechts to avodah zara shchitasik sheda. If you're shechting for a goy, now the goy maybe we'll see whether does a stam goy think about avodah zara or only if he says so. And another question is going to be but a yid is shechting it. Can a goy while you're shechting it, is thinking in his mind, oh, this animal I'm going to bring up to avodah zara. Does the goy have any influence on the animal, or is it only the one who does the actual act of shechita? There's two issues there. The animal's owned by the goy, but who's shechting it a yid? Does the machshav of the goy have combined with the mice of the yid or not? So there's two issues there. Machshav of the goy combined with the yid, and b'chlal, what's a stam goy? A stam goy is over the avodah zara or not? The shechita is kosher. But Abelezer passes. Abelezer says, first of all, it's clear that he holds that the machshav of the goy combines with the mice of the yid, and number two, he holds the way it seems that a stam goy is machshav is avodah zara. Even if he had in mind. So let's say the animal belongs to a partnership between the Yid and the Goy, and the majority of the animal belongs to the Yid, but the only part that belongs to the Goy is Chatzar Kavod is diaphragm. That's the only part that belongs to the Goy. And yet, since part of
the way of defining your partnership,
true, but the part that nobody really eats, it's not even chashiv. But since the Goy wants to bring that to avodah zara, it passes the entire animal. That's a chiddush here. So the Mishnah clearly spells out a machshava of a goy is for avodah zara, and his machshava combines with the mice of the yid. Rabbi Yossi says, I disagree with Rabbi Lezer, and I hold that the machshava of a goy does not help. I don't care what, even if you hold a stam of goy, maybe it's over avodah zara, but so what? It does not combine with the yid, and I'll bring it out for kotchim. Avodah zara will call chutz, and kotchim will call pnim, and see so kavuchaymer. When it comes to kabbanis, the kohen has a machshava that he shechting the animal to sprinkle the blood tomorrow, and when he's supposed to sprinkle today, oh, we're going to eat it, in the wrong time or the wrong place, all those things. Is a machshava passes by mukdashim, and yet. Who passes it? Who's the one who decides who has the most of that time? Only the one, the sheikh, the kohen. The Yisrael can stand there and have a mind spraying tomorrow, doesn't matter. It's the kohen. So makom she'ein hamachshava paisel b'chulin, when machshava does not pass by chulin. What do you mean? The Gemara will explain later that but here we have four different avodas. There's avodah of shchita, there's kabbalah, there's halacha, and there's rika. There's four avodas are preparing. And by saying about avodah zara, take chulin. You want to avodah zara. If you're going to think that you can do kabbalah, halacha, l'shem avodah zara, there's no psula, because there's no such avodah by avodah zara, kabbalah, halacha. It's only the shchita and the zrika. So makom she'ein machshava paisel b'chulin in all four. Like two of them don't work. Only two of them is surely surely you have lesser options of machshava taking effect. Surely the goy, the owner, his machshava has no bearing on the animal itself. Says the Gemara, Hani Tanoi Islu Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi. These Tanoim, the Tanakama and Rabbi Lezer, they both agree. Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi, and that what is, in other words, they both agree that the machshav of the goy does have an effect, but they're arguing what is the machshav of a goy when you don't know what it is. The time we learned, I heard Shabaylim Mefagli, and I heard that the Bailim can yet be Mefagli. I argue with Rabbi Yossi, said that the Bailim cannot be mefagel. I hold that the Bailim could be. That if the Yisrael standing there has in mind that the Shrita should be with a Zrika at the wrong time or eating in the wrong place, it ruins the animal. So it's Machlei Tanakama and Rabbi Lezer. Me Tanakama, so Tanakama holds Isha Mana the Chashavini Loi. Why? Because Tam Machshav. I don't say Tam every guy thinks about Avodah Zarah. But Rabbi holds no. So they're arguing. So those two are arguing what the guy's machshava, but they both agree that the guy's machshava would have a bearing. Rabbi Yossi holds that the guy's machshava has no bearing. Araya from kachim, and they hold no araya from kachim. Could we go back kachim also? The Yisrael can ruin the animal. Even if we heard him close say, "I want this animal to be used for avodah zarah," just because this guy thinks has no bearing on the Eid's shchita. That's one version. Ikinamri, another version is that in fact the Tanakama does argue to Rabbi Lezer. But to why? We're talking about a case, but the Shamini the Chashiv. We're talking about a case where we heard the guy clearly express himself saying, I want this animal to be Avodah Zarah. So it can't be an argument there. The guy clearly says so. So the argument must be whether the guy's machshava has any bearing. The Chashiv pligi Tanakama so key. The Tanakama holds when do we say zeh mechashiv is a oived hanimil b'fnim? I hold that only works by kabbanis, that the Yisrael. In other words, he also argues that Rabbi Yossi by kabbanis. You Rabbi Yossi is by kabbanis. The Yisrael has no bearing. I only Yisrael does, but that's only by kachim, not by Avodah Zarah. Aber b'chutz loy, chutz mipnim loy alfinim. We don't learn Avodah Zarah from kabbanis. By kabbanis, the Yisrael, the balabos of the behemoth has a bearing on it. And because the kohen is, we had a whole sugi. Remember, kohen shlucha the rachmaninu or shlucha the daninu, who shluchim are they? The also Rabbi Lezer Meimer comes along. Rabbi Lezer and says, "Yalfin and chutzpnim." Rabbi Lezer comes along and says, "We learn out chutzpnim." Rabbi Lezer says, "Yes." Now, exactly, we'll learn out about the from kachim. That what? That the guy's machshava has a bearing. Chutz means avodah zarah. We're talking about chutz is chulin, chulin which is outside the base of Mikdash. And the Asher Rabbi Yossi Meimer comes along Rabbi Yossi, and he says, "Afilu b'fnim." Rabbi Yossi says, "Afilu b'fnim nami zeh mechashev v'zeh oived lamin." Rabbi Yossi says, "What? I argue with the Tanakama regarding kabbanis." He says, "No, itma we learned a machlekes look a sheichel as a behema. So let's learn a similar machlekes. If somebody shechts a behema, lizrik dama. If someone shechts a behema to sprinkle his blood, avodah zarah. So you shechted the behema, but you had in mind not the shchita should be for avodah zarah. You had in mind that the next activity, the zrika, should be l'shem avodah zarah. Okay, you had that in mind. In other words, if you would have shechted, had in mind that the animal should be avodah zarah, don't talk about this. Avodah zarah. It's also everything. It's also. We're talking about here that you did not have in mind that all the shchit be avodah zarah. You shechted it for yourself, but you had in mind that the zik will be avodah zarah. And the question is, you're doing one avodah and you're having in mind another avodah. Do we say that mechashvin avodah l'avodah? We had this thing, same sugi in Zvachim, and so on. You had in mind you're going to be roasting the fats for avodah zarah. So what the activity I'm doing right now is not for avodah zarah, but I'm thinking now about another avodah which will be for avodah zarah. And Rabbi Yechon said so. We'll see in a minute why. And Rav Shimon Melakish says muteris. Rabbi Yechon says it's possible why mechashvin avodah la'avodah. You can think from one avodah by kabbanis. If you're going to shech the carbon, let's say while you're doing a shchita, you thought that, you know what, I'm going to spray the blood tomorrow. That's pigul. So we could be mechashiv from one avodah to another avodah by kabbanis. And yalfin and chutzpah, the yalfin and chutzpah. If you look at Rashi, the Gamin Chutzpah, you'll see Isar avodah chum. Chutz.
On the bottom here, it says chutz mitnim. Shevet avodah chum b'chulin.
Yeah, exactly. Chulin is chutz, and that's the same thing here. Chulin is chutz and korban is b'nim.
Doesn't mean necessarily avodah zarah.
What else could be a problem?
No, I'm saying chulin means stuff.
Where's the machshava? Shabbos, you're shechting on Shabbos itself. Where else do you have a machshava?
You can't.
No, if
you have in mind you're shechting for chulin, you can't bring these animals as a carbon. And
that's like Lo Lishma, which we'll see later.
You have in mind.
That's called pnim. That's anything to do with the carbon is called pnim because it's inside the base of English. Anything which is outside the base of English is called chutz. But where else does machshava play a role? If I have machshava that I'm going to check the behemoth, but I plan to eat it without salting it, so what? The only time machshava has a bearing is avodah zarah. Okay, so and he holds yafin chutzpnim. So think about avodah zarah. You did one avodah and you thought about another machshava. It's possible. Comes along Shlokish, he says muteres. Shlokish says muter. Why? Ein mechashvim avodah lavodah. You cannot mechash avodah. And v'loy gamrin chutzpnim. I piggle you do. You can't learn chutzpnim. Exact same machlekes we had before. The way the second Nigdamri understood the machlekes the Tanaim there. Says the Gemara, but also Tamayu. In fact, the Bechor Shlokish had the same argument in another case. Not by pigul, because obviously pigul is all about one avodah and another machshava. We're talking about eat mashachta lishma, lizrak dama shaloi lishma. You shachted lishma, but you had in mind that I'm going to sprinkle the blood. Dafke shaloi lishma, only lishma. And we're talking about over here about carbon chatas, because all other kabbanas, if you sprinkle shaloi lishma, whatever is lishma, it's still a kosher carbon. It's only a question of whether you yaitze your obligation. So we're talking about chatas or a carbon pesach, where if you did lishma, you're not yaitze. We had a machlekes in the first mission as well. Carbon Ashram applies that as well. So Rabbi Yechon says, well, mechashvin me'avoida la'avoida. So you were shechting correctly, and you had in mind you're going to sprinkle incorrectly. You pass it. And the Shlach says, Ksheder, and you learn from Machshav Pigul, and you're lucky to Ksheder kosher. And therefore, I Pigul, you don't learn from Machshav Pigul. So it's the same machlekes. So whether you mechashim avodah or not, whether you learn from Pigul. So we need two machlekes and one by if you shechted shalei lishma, Manasseh lose like shalei lishma. And one is where you shechted avodah zara, and Manasseh you're going to roast it for avodah zara, not the shechit itself. We need both. We need it. The eat ma bahaf we only learned over here. Bahakam Rab Shimon Lakish only over here. Rab Shimon Lakish. Why mishum the chutz mepnim lo yafinen. We don't learn chutz for pnim. You don't learn chutz for pnim. Avo pnim mepnim, but learning pnim mepnim. Okay, over there, if we only knew the avodah zara, so I would say, okay, avodah zara is chutz. This is a pnim. It's okay, it's a machlek we learn or not. But when it comes to shechting shaloi, lishma, so zrika is also avodah pnim. Maybe everyone agrees that pnim will learn, and we could be mechasher from one avodah, just like pigul mechasher. So to here, the shlach should be made. I will pnim maybe shlach is made. We only do this by he come Rabbi Yechon, only here Rabbi Yechon said. I would say if we only knew by avodah zara, I would say Rabbi Yechon avodah zara. If only knew kachim, I would say only by kachim. He said what? You learn pnim pnim. Avodah zara maybe moeder shlakish. Tzricha, therefore you need both. So we have this machlekes, and we'll continue tomorrow in this machlekes. Yeah. One interesting thing here. You have to go back to this taste. Very interesting taste. Which I didn't speak out. I don't know what time we'll finish. We talk about it here is there's an expression here, Itzach Leila Abba, that Abba needed. Shmuel was just talking about the Rav, and he used the expression on top of the page, 2 lines on top of the page. Abba needed such a strong thing of willing the ears. He called him Abba. So question, who's Abba? Rav. So why is he sometimes called Rav? Why is he sometimes called Abba? So Rashi says over here is that his real name was Rav, but he's called Abba as a term of endearment, a term of respect. And Shmuel was a good friend of Rav, and therefore he called him Abba. The Sefer Aruch learns the other way around. Rav's real name was Abba, but the Rav in Bavel was like Rebbe. Rebbe's real name was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, but he was called Rebbe. So Taisus here, Yitzchak Abba has a whole discussion about which is the correct one. And then he brings a Gemara, but Rabbi Yechon heard somebody say, called Rav Abba Aricha, and he got very angry. So he wanted to prove from there that Abba was not a term of endearment, that was probably his name, and therefore Rabbi Yechon is angry. Who are you to call Rav by his name? But then he says Lav Dafka, because Abba Aricha, Abba the tall one, and we'll see later more in the Masechet Nida that Rav was tallest in his generation. That Abba Aricha, and therefore, that's how you talk about, could be it was a title, but what are you giving adjectives for? But then Tay says the following thing, which I don't know where he gets it from, but it's a fascinating thing. I'll just quote you the Tay says. Tay says, Itzach Leil Abba, the last few lines of Tay says. He says here, Rabbi Yechon himself used to call him Abba. He said, we'll learn later about actually Chulin. He said, Abba was a very strong, comes from a very strong family, therefore he can fast. We're not so strong, and we have to spend money. We'll see the Gemara there. But he said this. Look what he says there. I'll just read. He's called him Abba. Rabbi Yechon Gufa Yakorei Abba. Rabbi Yechon used to call Rav by the name of Abba. Skip a line. Afal pi sherav hoyu choshuv harbim Rabbi Yechon. Rav was much more distinguished, much more choshuv than Rabbi Yechon. Where does he get that from? Not only that, the halacha, when we have a rule, whenever Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yechon and Shlakish argue, we always pass to Rabbi Yechon. And yet, Teish is saying even though Rab was much more chashuv than Rabbi Yechon, we did have a Gemara that Rab, when he sat in the Rebbe, a fire was around him. But where it is, unless that's his mocker, that Rab chashuv harbe, that's tam chashuv harbe Rabbi Yechon. Amazing.
What's his gather of chshivas? What does he measure?
I don't know.
Compare one to another.
I don't know. We hadn't gotten that Vav there, but when Rav came to Bavel, that's when learning started. So he brought Torah to Bavel. Going to one pshat in the Gemara, Rashi in the Gemara. And came tomorrow at 6:15 in the morning in the Chabad Nitzah.